record. I hate that. That is so obnoxious. All right. Here we go. Let's take a look. Hi, everybody. You know us. We are setting up. We are live. So, hi. Welcome back to Everything Horses and More. Educating, liberating, and inspiring horse owners around the world. So you know who I am. Give me a second. I have to turn my phone off. Lots of things going on as usual here. I had to take my truck into the what do you call it? Truck into service because the AC is not working and it's a monsoon here. So we may lose internet. What else is new? Sabrina and I were just talking about, you know, how when we listen to other people's podcasts, like I'm sure you all do, how perfectly clear they are. We have such a disadvantage here being out in the country. So give me 1 second, guys. And that was my vet. Oh, there's so much going on. Okay, let me just turn my phone off. Sorry. So yeah, we're like, well, we try to be professional here. But it really stinks when someone was complaining on, I think the last podcast, you know, you keep coming in and out, you keep, you know, freezing. Yeah, I mean, it stinks. But all right, y'all know who this beautiful young blonde is here. My co-host, Sabrina Arbogast. Yay! Let me see if I can get these captions. I know, it's just another new feature that I can't stand. Let's see here. As we scroll down, let me see how I can turn that sucker off. There we go. Permanently, we should be able to do that. All right, well, welcome back. Oh yeah, Karen, it does look great down, doesn't it?
Washed.
It's washed, she said. I tell you, you're too funny. Okay, so today's topic, wow, it is all about cribbing. Does your horse crib? The newest science and discoveries. So I'm gonna talk, you know, of course, give you guys my experience with cribbing and what's worked and what hasn't worked, what I think contributes to it. Some of it you guys might already know. And then I was really excited about some of this research. Some of it is really technical because it goes into some of the vet schools and papers that have been written. I mean, it really goes into some deep research regarding the neurochemistry, specifically within the brain when it comes to cribbing. But then there's some other things that are really interesting about my research that I found. So in particular, these articles deal directly with the effects of dopamine. And that's going to be a key word in today's podcast, dopamine. The effects of dopamine in horses that crib, children with ADHD, Parkinson disease, and drug addiction. So it was really fascinating. You guys all know how much I love ADHD or ADD. ADHD, it might be. Yeah, oh, okay. Sorry. Yeah, hyperconnectivity, hyperconnectivity. So, so when I read this research, I've kind of just taken pieces because there was like 10 pages that I copied and pasted. So I just took fragments. So I'm going to try and make it understandable. And I think I'm going to lead in with, I know, Sabrina, how is Karma with her cribbing?
She's definitely not as bad as I remember Billy being. Like, she can go out and she doesn't like go to it right away. It takes her a little bit of time. And then I think it's boredom or something. And then she starts and I'm like, and then I put her calm.
Yeah.
And you have an electric fence.
Yes, correct. That's excellent. So yeah, electric fence. A lot of people are like, how do you prevent a horse from cribbing? So I'm just going to tell you guys, I think if you if you don't know already, there's no way to stop cribbing. Hold on though, just hold on. And I've said this before, if you can catch the cribbing in a weanling up until about 12 months, a year, yes. And you have to know how to change it. And so I'll give you my experience with changing cribbing. And Sabrina's got a 3-year-old. My little 3-year-old was a cribber too. Unfortunately, they both came from the same farm, the same breeder, who's a lovely.
Yes.
It just the mama horses were very anxious, especially Blue. I don't know too much about Karma's mom.
She was in there with a couple other horses.
So she might have been feeding off of it. And then the youngsters learned from each other too.
Yeah.
So horses can learn how to crib just because, you know, I've had some horses in training. None of my horses have ever cribbed until I had Billy off the track thoroughbred, until I got these off the track thoroughbreds. Yeah. I never, you know, I had clients with horses that would crib. And I noticed that in the work that I do, the methodology, that the cribbing would cease tremendously. You might see like 75, 80% of the cribbing would go away while they were in training with me. And that's because so much of the work that I do is meditative. You know, the horses, it's working on their nervous system. They're learning how to self-regulate and self-soothe in a healthier way. And so cribbing is about self-soothing. For those of you that don't know that, it's about self-soothing. And maybe we can divide this up into 3 categories. You've got the horses that choose to crib to self-soothe. You've got the horses like Karma that probably learned how to crib.
I think so.
Yep, out of boredom, and babies chew, you know, between their teething.
Yep.
Yep. And, you know, they're curious. So she definitely could have picked that up easily. And in my experience with horses that have picked it up through boredom, it still isn't easy to stop, because this is what the science is going to get into, because it's an addiction, you guys. It is a high. And that's where the dopamine comes in. Now, dopamine and endorphin are similar chemicals within your nervous system, your brain chemistry. So if you all know, we all know what endorphin is. Well, dopamine produces similar feel-good states of relaxation, calm, and ease. The opposite is adrenaline and cortisol. They are heightened states of stress, where, you know, the body, the nervous system is flooded with these chemicals. And these chemicals are what tell us and horses, they are the alarm system. Adrenaline and cortisol, when it's released in quickly and in massive quantities from stress, this is what tells us that we need to be, you know, cautious. We go into self-preservation modes. So I just want to give a little bit of general information out there, and then I'll keep building and connecting as I always do. So it's a big problem, cribbing. And when we had Billy, so I had the 3 off the track thoroughbreds that I rehabilitated. Both Joey was basically so broken down at the age of 3 with stress founder and rotation. And he, you know, he had to be stall ridden for months and 2 feet of bedding, and, you know, he almost died. We self-corrected everything. But the point I'm making is Joey was in so much pain. The cribbing never showed up, but it started to show when Lovey first came as a 2-year-old. And I just left her alone almost for a year to just be a horse and relax. And, you know, I didn't want to put any more stress on her because she had ulcers, she was underweight. I mean, it was just, it was deplorable how she came in looking so horrible. I mean, they were just going to send her to the meat factory. And so they were literally letting her waste away. She came with, you know, ringworm and rain rot so bad that most of her hair on her back was gone from the saddle. They never hosed her down. They treated her horribly, and they left her to basically, she was starving. And the owner came to visit and heard about me through the vet, and, you know, sent a picture. I mean, she was just skin and bones. It was disgusting. It just makes me disgusted. You know, they were literally letting her starve at the racetrack. And then she was going to go to the killers. So she, was a different situation, but again, stressed out from the track. And so when Lovey first came and was just learning from everyone else how to relax, all these, the other horses, she would attach herself. She had the beginning the beginning behaviors of cribbing. And because I was always in and out of my old training barn, just like I'm in and out of these barns here, but it was a big facility that I had, tons of students, tons of help. And so we all had watchful eyes, and it was easier in that situation with Lovey, who was not in training. We did not want to stress her out, but it was easy to have her in the stall all day. Then she was turned out at night. So when she was in the stall and she had 24/7 alfalfa, was doing all the things to keep her, to help her self-soothe in a healthy way, by eating alfalfa. Alfalfa is one of the best hays for any horse with ulcers. But she would start attaching herself to the side of the stall. And so we would just interrupt that behavior. In that case, an easy interruption worked. And then she'd go back to eating her hay. And then when she was out at night, I never saw her clinging to the fence or anything like that. But I did see it, starting up in the stall, but we interrupted that. And then we got Billy a year or two later, an older horse who had been on the track for 7 years. And again, stress founder, but not nearly as bad as Joey. And Billy was a hardcore cribber. So that, what do you expect? 6 years on the track, 5 or 6 years. So they start him at 1. And I think I got him at the age of 8. So he had 7 years, you guys, of that kind of stress and living in a freaking stall all the time. We did everything. We, put the hot sauce all around, hot sauce powder, all brushed on with a paintbrush all around his stall. He'd suck on his bucket. We take the buckets out, and sure, he'll quit for a little while until he gets out on the fence. So let me give you another horse, and then we get little 8-month-old Blue. And Blue was born here on the farm, just like Sabrina's Karma. They're both born here because I bought the breeder of them. We bought the farm from her. She lives up the road. And so it wasn't the person that created this, but Blue's mom was a maniac. And so she came to Barb pregnant, really high strung, really nervous, really agitated, really anxious. And then she gives birth to this young horse, Blue, that I end up acquiring. So Blue learns all these behaviors. And what made it worse is, Barb did it right. She had brood mares with babies. They all, got pregnant at the same time. So they'd give birth at the same time. So she could create that socialization for the youngsters. However, Blue's mother would not allow him to socialize. And she was she was also not a nurturing mother. And so when you're dealing with like emotional connection, we did a podcast on that probably last year. It's huge what the research that they have out there now, how emotions tie in to our nervous system, which I think that's common sense, but just the depth of how, an emotional detachment or the lack of a connection with your mother or the human and horse, or the lack of nurturing from your mom can just really mess us up, you guys. Parts of the brain don't develop as quickly or develop at all. And not to mention, you acquire all of these types of anxieties of abandonment, and displaced behaviors start happening. So Blue came cribbing, diarrhea, screaming bloody murder at 8 months of age. And I knew immediately who to put him in. He went in with a foster parent, Smokey. Smokey was still alive then. And Smoke had plenty of experience with young horses, and he was the best to help. And so was Lovey to help Blue. And so I was able, between that change in environment and energetic change, total frequency change here, to calm, relaxation, harmony, everybody gets along, plus a little bit of the work that I do. He's only 8 months old. So it was really important to me to get him in the round pen online, teaching him how to self-regulate through movement, methodical movement that was going to produce endorphin, not adrenaline, that was going to produce dopamine, not cortisol. So all of those things helped, but he was also really young, and that's the point. So he had an environment that was conducive and supportive, because I couldn't be with him 24/7. And he had enough interruptions throughout the day between me and my staff to catch anything. And then he had, his work with me on a regular basis that would help him switch, change not just his patterns and his behaviors, but change, change the way that he was feeling internally, the nervous system. But he was young. And then when we did the Starting the Young Challenging Horse course, we used Blue again, who was 2, and Sabrina's Karma, who was Susie. Sabrina bought Susie after this video. She fell in love filming and bought Susie, renamed her Karma. But both Blue and Karma were born here. So when we filmed that course, they were both 2. And, Karma, it was 2 years now. Karma came to me for some 30-day training because Barb wanted to sell her. And then we're like, yeah, this would be perfect for a new course on young horses that have so many issues that most people don't realize. Not to mention she's a cribber. She wasn't a hardcore cribber. Okay, hardcore. Billy, 7-year track, or maybe you have a performance horse or a retired performance horse. If they've been under so much stress and adrenaline for so long, it's impossible. You can make it better, but you will never get rid of it. So, Karma was still relatively young. However, excuse me, everybody's unique. And so, you've got to look at nature and nurture, what type of personality, temperament does your horse have? What are their experiences? That's the nurture. What have they learned as coping mechanisms? That's the nurture. What is their environment like? That's big time that most people don't consider. What type of environment does your horse live in? I say this often. Somebody could walk in this room and scream at both Sabrina and me, and both of us could take it completely differently. And so, some horses can do well in certain environments and others can't. And I have found with, working with so many horses, especially rehabilitation, that the horses that are really easygoing, and this is a pattern, so this is across the board, it's pretty black and white for me. The horses that are the easiest to get along with, have the best temperaments, more passive by nature, not dominant, really get screwed up the most, you guys. They get screwed up in 2 ways. One, we take advantage of their easy personalities and temperaments, even if they're, want to please you, and we get greedy and we take advantage of that and we use these horses up. We don't know when to stop because they're so compliable. Or we use them as lesson horses because they're so compliable and submissive. But we don't realize that they are just as sensitive as the hyper reactive horse. It's just different. They just deal with it differently, just like Sabrina and I would deal with that person screaming at us differently, but it doesn't mean it doesn't bother us. So put that in perspective. The horses that are more dominant or reactive, more highly sensitive, they are more transparent, right? I mean, they're showing you exactly how they feel about things. And they are also, it's like fighting, how do I want to put this? Fighting can be really healthy if it's done in a healthy way, because it allows people to express themselves. It is a form of communication. It does show that you care. Unless I'm not talking about a mean fight or a cruel fight. I'm talking about, 2 people that care about each other having a fight or a big disagreement. It is a healthy way of communicating. Unfortunately, it comes out as a fight or an argument. So it also, when we do produce or say what we need to say, even when it's difficult and challenging, we are also releasing adrenaline and producing endorphin. So there's a lot of physiological and psychological things that happen when we're able to express ourselves that are positive. And that's what happens with more transparent horses that are hyperreactive. They may be very stressed, but man, they are the easiest horses to rehabilitate. It's these really quiet horses, and Sabrina's got one, super quiet, super, layered and protective, and they can get really withdrawn, and they're deep thinkers. And it's really hard to read them, isn't it? It's really hard to read them and understand. And then if you push and push and push to try to read them more, or get an expression, or they can start to go into that self-preservation mode of freezing again and checking out. So it's quite a delicate dance. And that's part of what we were showing in the Starting the Young Challenging Horse course, was so many young horses get like this because they're really easy and they get pushed too hard, too fast. And all of a sudden you've got this horse that doesn't want to do anything. And it's, developing all of these really bad behaviors like cribbing to try to cope with all that pressure, because it's just such an easygoing horse. Does that make sense?
Mhm.
And we have,
Oh, yeah.
and you guys know, if you got any questions or anything, Sabrina's your woman to she'll see your question. So it's good to just talk about this so that we have kind of a baseline of information moving forward, because believe me, these research papers are way too technical. So I'm gonna read them, and I will pause. There's just paragraph after paragraph taken from different research papers. I just took paragraphs because it's just crazy how technical these guys write. So I will pause when I'm trying to, or I want to highlight a specific sentence that I think is going to really make sense. The rest of it doesn't make a lot of sense because we don't think like that, right? Most of us don't. This is the Journal of Equine Veterinary Science, most of this. And so these are papers and studies that students have done, thank God, right? For all of us. Any questions? Okay. So how I found out about dopamine is I've known about dopamine. I've been writing about this for a long time now myself and studying it. But I'm always looking for a common thread, and I'm a pattern expert. And so when I was reading 10 pages, and there was many more, so I was reading, oh my gosh, like 20 different articles. There was a common thread, you guys, in all of these, and it was the word dopamine. And so I'm like, oh man, as soon as I get through, gathering what information I want, I'm going to go research more about dopamine. And so that's how I'm like, wow, this is the common piece, the common thread throughout everything. And if we, I don't have an answer for cribbing. The closest thing I have is when we took Billy, who was one of the most extreme cribbers, naturally being off the track, racing for 7 years. When we put him into that 90-day OTTB restarting course, after 90 days, like we could leave him out in the 2-acre training field with us and all the other horses, and he would not crib, you guys. He would not crib. The only time he'd start cribbing again was in his stall, and it was maybe 50% of the time instead of 100, or again, out on the fence 50% of the time. But when he was in that training environment where we were always producing endorphin and dopamine and helping horses self-regulate, he got into that zone. He got right into that. So it was so cool. Yeah. It's so cool. Now, was he able to take that feeling and, self-regulate outside of that environment that we were creating during training? Like I said, 50% of the time. He did go, remember, you weren't with me at the time, but you heard about this. I had an opportunity. The mounted police in Tampa had contacted me, and they were looking for, a horse. Now they wanted to train it. That was, I found that really odd, but they were looking for a candidate from me, and Billy would have been perfect. And they thought so too. And they came and interviewed Billy twice. And they ended up taking Billy for 40 days. And It was horrifying. He came back so underweight, worse than when I got him off the track, stressed out. His feet were a mess. He had bite marks all over him from other horses. And of course, I'm keeping on top of all of this. And I got threatened by their attorney. I mean, I was gonna,
Wow. I didn't
oh
know
yeah,
that.
I was gonna pursue legal action. And I'm talking about it for the first time 5 years later,
Wow.
5 years later almost, out loud. But yeah, they were gonna sue my ass basically. Yeah. And then, we don't want to mess with all that, right? So it was just deplorable what they had done to him. So yeah, he came back even worse off. Yeah. Yep. I had my other vet who's our chiropractor. They had jacked him up so bad. Sandra worked on him and on a what do you call it when you have a rescue and you are identifying on a scale? I don't know the correct terminology.
The weight thing?
The weight, like, is the horse a 1 or a 5? Billy was a 2.
Oh, wow.
Yep.
Wow.
Yep. I mean, his spine was showing you guys, his hip bones. I mean, is this disgusting? And when I kept all the emails when I was like, what the heck? Because it got dropped off while I was gone that weekend. Came back, I was crying. The girls were crying. Nobody wanted to tell me how bad he looked until I got back from my vacation. And, they're like, well, he was pulling down all our fences and we put him out in a big herd. And I'm like, yeah, but I told you what he needs to eat. And you told me he was going to get X amount of groceries a day. And well, they're only in to get fed. And I'm like, well, it looks to me like he got fed outside and he got chased off of his food. And they were feeding like coastal. He was out with like 40 other horses, you guys. Just disgusting. I mean, anyway. So yeah, so he came back. He left in great shape mentally and physically and came back and needed work all over again. God love him.
Was he more of a mess?
Yeah.
I mean, like,
yeah. And that's something that I tell, my students that want to join my mastery membership program. When you dive into that big, school that I've created, that online university that I've created, the mastery membership program, it really is a university. It's so comprehensive. There's no turning back. And nobody does. I mean, everybody that jumps in is in 110%. But it's like once the horse knows, or they get a taste of what life can be, and then it's taken away, the horror of going back to an environment. And I'm sure that the things that he was doing obviously were totally new to him. And I questioned a lot of things before they took him, especially the level of rider and, who was going to be training this horse. Oh my gosh. So yeah, so put all that together and it was a lot worse for him in every way, He had to fight for food. He wasn't used to that. He was used to a stall. Yeah, he had all these different people working with him, horrible riders. They had jacked up his back. He was in really bad shape. Yeah, oh, I tell you, I've been through the gamut, haven't I? Trying to trust people and professionals. I am so distrustful, as you guys know. I mean, look at the shit that's happened to me between farrier experiences. My vets are phenomenal.
Yeah.
My vets are just from God. But my gosh, not to mention a lot of, my personal learning along the way, many, years ago with different instructors and, clinicians and trainers. I mean,
very disappointing.
Yeah, very disappointing. Anyway, so let's talk a little bit about cribbing. And I'd love for you guys to, chime in on this if any of this makes sense or it doesn't make sense, because it's pretty abstract, some of this. This first article, and I just pulled a paragraph, you guys, from the Journal of Equine Veterinary Science, a neurologic perspective of equine stereotypy, abstract. So the discussion on the cause of equine stereotypy dates back nearly 400 years and has remained a speculation until recently. And this is about cribbing. Research now provides empirical support to many previously untested hypotheses, identifying restricted feeding, reduced social contact. So these are the reasons why These are the things that they've identified why horses crib. So restricted feeding, reduced social contact, and diminished locomotor activity as being critical to increased risk of stereotypy development. This review, so locomotor activity would be confining a horse in a stall, like Billy. You know, he goes out once a day to be breezed. He's confined to a stall. I think most of those horses do get 24/7 hay. But you guys may not know this. They jack all those thoroughbreds up on tons of steroids so that they bloat up and they get all that muscle and they get a lot of water weight. All of the two boys, my two male geldings, when they, both Joey and Billy, the first 30 days when all the drugs wore off after 30 days, I didn't know what I was looking at, because both horses were so buff, so muscular, so their top lines were gorgeous. And after the meds wore off, I was like, I was seeing spine, I was seeing sunken necks, you know, it's just really, really bad, sunken flanks. So this review critically assesses this and other current research into equine and non-equine stereotypy and concludes with a neurologic model of equine development that highlights genotype dependent upregulation of transmission in midbrain dopaminegeric, it's dopamine RGIC pathways as being extremely important to the underlying causes. And there, just dismantling this model may provide additional strategies of stereotypy, impediment, and reduction. So let's keep reading. I won't bore you. Try to just get to the stuff that makes sense to us. Here's a chapter 11, the structure and function of the dopamine transporter and its role in diseases. So this was interesting because this can relate to horses. Abstract. In this chapter, we explore the basic science of the dopamine transporter, DAT, an integral component of a system that regulates dopamine homeostasis. Dopamine is a key neurotransmitter for several brain functions, including locomotor control and reward systems. The transporter structure, function, mechanism of action, localization, and distribution, in addition to gene regulation, are discussed. Over many years, a wealth of information concerning the DAT has been accrued and has led to increased interest in the role of the DAT in a plethora of central nervous system diseases. These DAT characteristics are explored in relation to a range of neurological and neuropsychiatric diseases, with a particular focus on the genetics of DAT, dopamine transporter. In addition, we discuss the pharmacology of the DAT and how this relates to disease and addiction. So like I said, this also blends into Parkinson's disease and drug addiction. And then ADD, hyper activity within children. So dopaminergic pathways are involved in inhibition and motor control, while noradrenergic pathways are involved in arousal and maintenance of attention. So dopamine pathways are involved in inhibition and motor control. Yeah, anyway. Just email me if anybody wants me to send you all this information as it relates to addiction, Parkinson's disease, and if anybody wants to further investigate and research, as well as ADHD. Mood disorders, wow, it's huge. I'm not going to read anymore. I only dumbed it down to about 3 pages. Let's get into dopamine. So dopamine is, how is it? Let's see, dopamine, biggest dopamine release. Are we addicted to dopamine? Can we survive without it? All right. Dopamine is released when your brain is expecting a reward. When you come to associate a certain activity with pleasure, mere anticipation may be enough to raise dopamine levels. It could be a certain food, sex, shopping, or just about anything else that you enjoy. What activities release dopamine? Getting enough sleep, exercising, listening to music, meditating, and spending time in the sun can all boost dopamine levels. So I've never experienced any horses in my work ever with thousands of horses. I've never experienced any horses that were sleep deprived, but I do know, and this is just common sense, that many, because I don't deal with competition or show horses, performance horses. I may get retired performance horses like Billy, but I don't work in that realm of the show world or the traditional world where you will see, which makes sense, a lot of sleep deprived horses because the lights are on all night in the barns, there's tons of activity, stress, the horses are confined in a stall 23 hours a day. So just imagine Billy, a horse like that, or a horse that's in a high stress environment constantly with other horses screaming or stressed out, or, you know, you're traveling a lot as a clinician. And, you know, I can remember how stressed out my horses would get because they weren't used to those environments with thousands of other animals and horses and tens of thousands of people. And so, you know, did they get any sleep? They were just exhausted by like the third and fourth day of being at some of these national world expos. My horses were absolutely exhausted. And that was common sense to me. That was understandable because they were confined in, you know, in barns with lights on all night. So yeah, that's pretty sad. So, you know, sleep is really important for our horses and consistency in their environment. You know, there's so many factors. Overall, a balanced diet and lifestyle can go a long way in increasing your body's natural production of dopamine and helping your brain function at its best. So you guys are going to love this. What gives the biggest dopamine release? What is the biggest? What gives the biggest dopamine release? Heroin. Yep. So experts ranked heroin as the most addictive drug. I think we've all heard that, giving you a score of 3 out of a maximum score of 3. Heroin is an opiate that causes the level of dopamine in the brain's reward system to be increased by up to 200%. And I don't know about you guys, you know, you guys know how much I love to study and read and research. I also love educational programs. I don't know how many of you have ever watched Intervention. So yeah, I mean, they talk about this all the time. So what causes a lack of dopamine in the brain? Causes of low dopamine. A number of factors may be responsible for reduced dopamine in the body. These include sleep deprivation, obesity, drug abuse, saturated fat, and stress. Does stress use up dopamine? So it's the same for your horse. In interpretation of findings, acute stress is associated with increased dopamine. There's that word again, dopaminergic, dopaminergic, in I'm not doing well, output in animals and humans. And recent human evidence indicates that corticotrophin releasing hormone administration results in dopamine release. Does stress deplete dopamine? Yes. People exposed to a lifetime of physiosocial adversity, how about horses, may have an impaired ability to produce the dopamine levels needed for coping in acutely stressful situations. So, and why do I keep bringing up horses? It's not just because I personally believe horses and humans are so much alike, both in our physiology and in our bone structure and in our emotions. If you guys ever look at the skeleton of a horse and a skeleton of a man, if the horse were to rear up, we're very similar. Or if we go down on all fours, there's proven science. And I've written papers on this years ago, especially in the hippocampus area where we release hormones responsible for feeling good, like dopamine and endorphin, or the stress hormones of adrenaline and cortisol. So this is powerful. And this is something that I found out 15 years ago. And it's what it validated for me and the work that I was doing, my own method, my own work with horses and rehabilitation. It validated that horses feel the same. They feel the same extent, to the same extent that we do. And I mean, I've mentioned before in other podcasts, I've seen tears in certain horses' eyes. I've seen mourning. I've seen jealousy. I've seen, you name it, 100 different emotions in horses. And so the hippocampus area is responsible for producing and releasing. And the hippocampus in the horse and human is identical. It's the same size. And therefore, when we feel stressed or relaxed, we have the capacity, both horses and humans, to release the same amount of chemical when we're either relaxed or stressed. So this is pretty profound. So that's why I keep bringing up, even though this is specifically talking about people, humans, I'm bringing horses along. So acute stress totally uses up all of our dopamine, our resources to relax, and same with the horse. And the adversity that the horse has more so than us is they don't have a third lobe or layer to their brain. They don't have a frontal part of their brain that we do, that is responsible for analyzing and creativity and language like we have. So they can't sit there and overthink this like we do and try to problem solve and analyze and interpret and so forth and so on. But everything else is pretty closely linked. Does low dopamine cause anxiety? A brain chemical linked to pleasure and depression may also trigger fear, according to a new study. Researchers say this may explain why the neurotransmitter dopamine, known to cause addictive behavior, may also play a role in anxiety disorders. So here we go with cribbing. It's an addictive behavior, but it's the horse's way of releasing or producing dopamine. I've always known it was their way of releasing endorphin. It was an endorphin high.
Yeah,
that's
not endorphins, but I always knew it was some kind of high.
Yeah, that's
addiction.
the chemical. Yeah. Well, and it's similar. It's, this is part of my research years back. It's similar to, this is kind of kinky and weird. And it's just stuff that I've read. That's why I know about it. But there, for a while ago, I'm dating myself. There was a phase where young boys or men were hanging themselves to asphyxiate themselves during masturbation, because it was a higher pleasure of asphyxiating themselves, and then they would release themselves before they hung themselves. Some died from hanging themselves.
Time was that
Yeah, but it was that asphyxiation.
Oh wow.
Yeah. So it's like it's crazy.
I reckon that's why women like jokes
during sex. I was thinking that, I just didn't want to say it.
Oh.
I'm gonna let you say it. Sabrina. Shorty, her allergies. She's already COVID. No, teasing. No, but seriously, yeah, just it's crazy how all this stuff is linked together. But we're getting some good comments. You never know what we're going to talk about, huh, guys? That's why we call it horses, everything horses and more. The Pandora's box. So that's interesting. So stress affects dopamine levels, and dopamine, whatever, activity in the mesolimbic dopamine system. Changes in the mesolimbic dopamine neurotransmission are important for coping with stress, as they allow adaptation to behavioral responses to various environmental stimuli. I know that's pretty wordy. Are we addicted to dopamine? Dopamine is one of the many factors that can contribute to addiction. Contrary to popular belief, you can't be addicted to dopamine, but it does play an important role in motivating you to seek out pleasurable experiences like heroin or like strangulation or cribbing. So, so it's those behaviors or addictions that create dopamine. So dopamine itself, we can't, I mean, we need dopamine. It's already naturally within us. So that brings me to the work that I teach, especially the rhythmic, the Tai Chi part of my work, where it's mind body engagement and connection. And then during, how you learn how to embody movement and work with your horse on the ground through the art of lunging that I provide, and all through this movement and getting in sync and aligned with your horse's movement. All of this, the more you do it, the more rhythm you create. You naturally produce a meditative state because you're naturally producing endorphin, and that's the science behind all of that. So yeah, in that way, there's part of how you can help your horse self-regulate, because every time you do this work enough, that they're going to be seeking out that endorphin release, and they will clearly be able to differentiate, the old way, which was more adrenaline and not so easy and more stressful, to the new way of, wow, man, if I go into it with relaxation and I use my body a certain way through the biomechanics, that I'm teaching you and your horse, it just feels so much better. And therefore they are producing that level of dopamine release. So they learn that. They can learn how to self-regulate. Here we go. So how is dopamine produced and released? Dopamine produced by neurons in the arcuate nucleus of the hypothalamus is released in the hypophyseal blood vessels of the median eminence, which supply the pituitary gland. This acts on the lactotrope cells that produce prolactin. These cells can produce prolactin in absence of dopamine. Yeah, alcohol. What drugs increase dopamine? The most commonly abused by humans, opiates, alcohol, nicotine, amphetamines, and cocaine create a neurochemical reaction that significantly increases the amount of dopamine that is released by neurons in the brains. Remember, you naturally have the dopamine, and when you are using these opiates or drugs, it helps you produce more dopamine, and that's where the addiction comes in. Getting addicted to drugs, getting addicted to cribbing. And when you're stressed, like the horse, they don't know the dopamine, they're not able to release the natural amounts of dopamine. So they're going to find something that's going to help them produce that stress release. And that's why they go to cribbing. It is such a horrible habit, though, you guys, to break, if you even can, because it is so closely interwoven with the nervous system. My gosh, it's tough. So what is a dopamine diet for people? Dairy foods such as milk, cheese, and yogurt, unprocessed meats such as beef, chicken, and turkey, omega-3 rich fish such as salmon and mackerel, eggs, fruit and vegetables, in particular bananas, nuts such as almonds and walnuts, and dark chocolate. I love all of that.
Yeah, I'm not too much of a dark chocolate fan.
I'm big time dark chocolate. So I don't do too many fruits because I'm allergic to a lot of the sugar, being hypoglycemic, and then I get a phlegm. I get an allergic reaction. I have to be careful with that too. But I love fruit, but I can't eat a lot of it. Yeah, it's interesting. What kills dopamine cells? Until now, little has been known about whether human immune cells have an important role to play in Parkinson's disease. The stem cell researchers from Erlangen showed that in Parkinson's disease, T cells attack and kill nerve cells, which produce dopamine in the midbrain. So that makes a lot of sense. That's not good. Something going on with Parkinson's, that the T cells attack and kill the dopamine in the midbrain. Wow. Does magnesium increase dopamine? Magnesium, what's more, one study showed that supplementing with magnesium boosted dopamine levels and produced antidepressant effects in mice. What's more, one study showed that supplementing with magnesium boosted dopamine levels and produced antidepressant effects in mice. Sorry, guys, I'm just copying and paste. That didn't make a lot of sense. What are the symptoms of high dopamine? Effects of overly high dopamine levels include high libido, anxiety, difficult sleeping, increased energy, mania, stress, and improved ability to focus and learn, among others. Well, besides, I can see that all relating, anxiety, difficult sleeping, but increased energy is good, not stress, not mania, and an improved ability to focus and learn is good. So like 2 out of 8, the rest are not good of high dopamine. What happens if you don't have enough dopamine? Having low levels of dopamine can make you less motivated, less excited about things. It's linked to some mental illnesses, including depression, schizophrenia, and psychosis. Does vitamin B12 increase dopamine? Vitamins B6 and B12, among others, are directly involved in the synthesis of neurotransmitters like dopamine and serotonin. Vitamin B increases tyrosine, hydroxy activity, and dopamine production. That's some big words. What is the difference between dopamine and serotonin? The main difference: dopamine system dysfunction is linked to certain symptoms of depression, such as low motivation. Serotonin is involved in how you process your emotions, which can affect your overall mood. That's pretty cool. That's pretty cool. That's why I copied and pasted it. So, yeah. And that would be good stuff to know if you are a person suffering from depression or anxiety, or both. What to take, what you need more of. So can you survive without dopamine? L-DOPA is a chemical that becomes dopamine in the body. Without dopamine, our bodies and brains simply wouldn't work. We'd all be catatonic. I've met quite a few catatonic horses. Yep, Smokey was one of them. So talk about high stress. And even Billy could just get so close and shut down. But catatonic horses like Smokey, who was so severely abused, when they come out of that catatonic, severely shut down state, they go into explosive. Billy never did that. Dopamine serves many complex functions in the brain, and only kindergarten brain science describes it. And only kindergarten brain science describes it as an addictive drug. Well, like I said, sorry guys. I do my best. Oh my gosh, pretty interesting. Anybody have any questions before we wrap this podcast up? I'm just a messenger. I'm not an expert. I'm just putting some information out there and letting you guys know that there is some new science and research, and but you guys are going to have to do a lot of it obviously on your own. I'm more than happy if you email me to send you what I have, because it has the links to all of these research papers. If you'd like to further investigate. Hate to be the bearer of bad news. I think if there was a cure for cribbing, we would certainly know about it.
But it's sad because a lot of times horses that crib, nobody really wants them.
Yes.
It's like to hear the crib, oh, never mind, next. And that's sad.
It is so, that's a great point, Sabrina. I loved Billy. When we left the old big place and moved to this place and downsized, I mean, I had 14 horses. My role was to rescue them, rehabilitate them, and then find them a good match with my students. And that's what I did. I didn't plan on keeping him, but oh my gosh, was he fabulous and so talented and such a joy. He loved liberty.
Yes, he did.
He
He
loved
was
to
good
play.
at it.
Oh my God, well, he's so talented.
Mhm.
So he did find his perfect person. But yeah, I agree with you. It's sad. They do ruin fences.
Yeah.
I mean, that's,
It's not hard just to put a hot wire up.
yeah, the hot wire is the
I
best
wasn't knocking
advice.
his collar all the
Yeah.
time. I had a hot wire around it.
And the karma, I mean, the collar only works so much.
Mhm.
It really, you guys, none of that ever worked for Billy. He'd still find a way.
It worked for him.
He'd still find a way. Yeah. Well, Billy was, like I said,
Exactly.
such an extreme. I mean,
Exactly.
he'd latch on to anything, you
I
guys.
remember.
Yeah. So, oh my gosh,
He was so awesome.
he was beautiful inside and out. So yeah, you're lucky. Again, I think if you can get them early, there's
Mhm.
more hope, or at least it's not going to get any worse. But to pay attention to it, because when they do get stressed, that is their number one coping mechanism. They will go back to that. I can see that, like, there's no stress for Blue, but Blue, when he eats, so this is interesting, you know, I don't have Billy anymore, but I do have 3 thoroughbreds. I have Blue, Lovey, and Joey. When they eat their soaked pellets,
Mhm.
they pick the pellets up and eat it over the stall. You know, our stalls are, we don't have full walls.
Mhm.
They eat it so that they can kind of lick and suck a little bit.
Hmm.
They don't just eat out of their bucket. They
Yeah.
pick up and then they slobber all over the wall, but they're not cribbing, they're not
Right.
sucking air,
Right.
but it's this self-soothing thing.
Hmm.
And even the baby does that, because the baby is horrible with food. Yeah, I mean, he had such an issue with food.
Yeah.
So I think,
That's one thing Karma doesn't have.
I know,
Yeah.
thank God. Well, she came with great weight.
Yes, she
Blue
did.
was awful at 8 months
That's
old.
right. I
He was
remember.
awful
True.
and really stressed out.
Yes, he was.
So just, I think if you just, pay attention to your horses and their stress. Everybody deals with stress differently. Cribbing doesn't happen to a lot of horses. It happens to horses that are in high stress environments day in 24/7, and they have no way of releasing that stress
Wow.
or learning how to self-regulate. So
Mhm.
that's why it happens. And it's mostly performance horses. That's why I don't show. I'm not saying you can't train your horse. Like, we do train the horses to do all those beautiful maneuvers, but yeah, we don't want them stressed out. All right. Well, thank you. I hope you guys found this interesting and useful. Don't hesitate to email me with any questions or for any papers. And we will see you next week. Next week, we are not going to have a live podcast, because we are going to be doing another podcast with Erica Mason. And we've been doing a series on the chakra system. We're going to take a break from the chakra system, because we're going to focus on the following topic on the 15th. Oh, so we're not going to have one next week.
Okay, I was gonna.
That's correct.
Yes.
We're not having one next week, but on the 15th we are.
Yes.
And the topic is are you feeling challenged as an empath? You won't want to miss this podcast.
Very cool.
So we're going to talk about what it's like as an empath, and so forth and so on. So that's the 15th. And then the 22nd, we have Brad Kelly back, Master Farrier. Yay. So Masterclass Beginner's Guide to Hoof Care, part 2. And then can't wait for the 15th, but we're going to pre-record
On the 10th.
with Erica, and we'll play it. We'll stream it live. We just won't be live. I mean, it'll be live, but we'll be recorded.
Okay.
And that's what I'd like to do.
Okay.
I know I hadn't talked to you about it, but I thought, can we do that?
So we're gonna go live on Friday.
No, on the 10th, we're gonna
Record
record
it.
with her, just
Right.
us.
Right.
It won't be
So
live.
Then
Then
we
we'll
won't
take
be
that
able-
recording.
Yeah, but we won't be able to go live.
No, we won't. No, I know.
This is live.
But we can post it.
Yes.
we'll
we're gonna-
post it.
We're still gonna be on Zoom. We're
Yep.
gonna record it.
Yep.
And then on Wednesday, on 15th.
Yep. We'll
I'll
just
shoot it out.
we'll shoot it out. Yep.
Yep.
Cool. Okay. All right. So we'll see you guys next week. Have a great Labor Day. I can't believe summer is over. It's the 1st of September. Yeah. It's my stepson's birthday.
Yep.
He's 13 today. Shout out. I know he's not listening, but shout out to Mason. He's here. So we're going to take him out to dinner later. This lovely monsoon weather. And have a great Labor Day, and we'll catch up with you guys later. God bless. Stay safe, and may you always be one with your horse. Thank you. All right.